Yes, cool. Okay. So, in terms of the diagnostic criteria for GAD, um, we given that we have all new clients 13 and older, I might be getting doing the GAD 7, or is it 18 and older? You guys probably know this better than me, but that's okay. So we do have that as part of the intake paperwork, the GAD 7, which covers all of the key criteria uh, for generalized anxiety disorder, that one is experiencing excessive anxiety and worry for at least 6 months, and experiencing at least three or more of the following symptoms of restlessness, feeling fatigue, difficulty concentrating, irritability, muscle tension, sleep disturbances. So all the good information that we're getting through the GAD 7. Yes. Um, and so the topic that I think really honing in on today around treating GAD is that the individual finds it difficult to control worry. So the key word for GAD is worry, kind of like the key word for social anxiety is fear of judgment. And the key word for panic disorder is fear of the experience of having a panic attack. So for GAD, we're looking for clients talking about, I'm worrying all the time, or I can't control my worries. And the content of the worries is versus OCD, that the theme might be more a unique kind of contamination or sexual obsession or some kind of intrusive thought. The themes are going to be more around everyday topics. So it's not unusual to worry about your health or your finances or your relationships, but it's about how often are you worrying, how much distress is it causing, how much is it impacting your functioning, and how out of control do you feel locked into the experience of worrying about real life things that we all have a right to feel concerned about, but how much is that consuming life versus you being able to live your life? So i- individuals speak to, I just can't stop worrying and I'm worrying all the time. And for clients, it's really starting off feeling like it's something out of their control that they actually can't stop. And so the work of treating GAD is really helping clients to understand um, that the act of worrying is actually like all other compulsions that we treat. So similar to if a client said, "Oh, I can't stop washing my hands because I feel germy," or "I can't stop checking the stove to see if I made a mistake." When one is engaging in worrying, like, "Oh, what if I can't what if I don't get that job and then I'm not gonna be able to pay rent, or what if my kids aren't okay when they get to college?" One might feel like, "Oh, it just happens automatically, I can't control it." And they might feel that it's actually unpleasant, but when we engage in worrying, our parasympathetic nervous system is engaged. So our brain almost it's reinforcing. Our brain feels like all other compulsions, that we're getting that short-term relief. So it's this feeling of, okay, I'm fixing something. I'm problem solving. And so it's not that we can't stop worrying. It's just that it actually feels it's something that we do because it makes us feel like we're getting control of the uncontrollable. And so it's really kind of reconceptualizing that the worrying is the thing that we do to get some short-term relief, but actually ends up causing long-term distress where we miss out on living life, gives us the illusion that we're fixing things, and it just deepens the grooves of the worry cycle and anxiety. So, question anything about conceptualizing the act of worry, the behavior of worrying as a mental compulsion. That anyone have any questions about that or thoughts about that? There's a little video that I found helpful on the worry cycle with some good languaging we could use for clients. Hopefully, I have it shared in a way that you guys will hear the volume.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar,
You guys hear it?
Stop the Worry
Okay,
Cycle,
that's
featuring Carrie Gregory.
the good part. Hold on, let me.
These webinars are presented by the Anxiety and Depression Association.
Blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's all really good stuff, and they're doing great things, but we don't have time for the intro. Okay.
How do I stop worrying? How can I shut off my mind? How can I stop my racing thoughts? And it's such a great question. The answer in theory is pretty simple. In practice, it takes a little bit more effort and energy, but you absolutely can learn to quiet down the mind. Our minds are there to keep us safe and to solve problems. That is what the brain is designed to do. And when we solve a problem, we get this little hit of dopamine and it feels amazing. And we get this rush of self-confidence and it just feels really good, if only for a brief moment. So what happens is that problem solving can become this emotional release that we start to seek out anytime we feel a little ill at ease. So if only I can solve this problem, then I can move on with my day. And that becomes a reinforcement loop. Now, what happens when the problem doesn't really exist? It's only the possibility of a problem. Well, that's called anxiety. And our minds try to think of all of the problems that could happen. And how do you solve for that? You end up in a worry cycle. So what it might look like is, what if I screwed that thing up at work? Oh, what if my boss catches that mistake before I do? What if I get called into a meeting and I have to explain myself? What if I get fired? What if? So we worry out all these scenarios in an attempt to have a resolution to a problem that doesn't even exist in this moment. Sound familiar? Now, what do we do to stop it? Oftentimes, these worry cycles get started in what's known as the default mode network. So that's an area of our brain that's always sort of on, but it's where we daydream, we fantasize, we mind wander, we get lost. It's running commentary, and we aren't really paying that much attention to it, but it's where we daydream, we fantasize, we mind.
What is the it?
Get started in an attempt to have a resolution to a problem that doesn't even exist in this moment. Sound familiar? Now, what do we do to stop it? Oftentimes, these worry cycles get started in what's known as the default mode network. So that's an area of our brain that's always sort of on in the background. It's running commentary, and we aren't really paying that much attention to it, but it's where we daydream, we fantasize, we mind wander, we get lost in thought. It's that space. And the thoughts that are occurring in that space are called stimulus-independent thoughts. And these are thoughts that we're not really focused on. They're not anything that have to do with our immediate sensory input. You aren't in charge of these thoughts. They are random. And every so often, one hooks us. And it strikes that nerve, and it gives us that uh-oh feeling. I've got to solve this problem, and until I do, I can do nothing else. Right? So we have to break down that reinforcement cycle, breaking down that uh-oh and immediate need to solve the problem. Okay, so research shows that when we're engaged in tasks that we have mastered, it allows our minds to simultaneously wander into the space. So if you aren't really focused on something that is engaging with your attention, you're likely to end up mind wandering. So what do you do to stop it? Well, this is where the idea is pretty simple, but something that has to be practiced and learned in order to be effective. Awareness and intentional focused attention. So identify what your triggers are for when you notice that your mind wandering is getting the better of you. Maybe it's a physical sensation like butterflies in the stomach, or maybe it's noticing you're getting warm, your heart rate is increasing, whatever that is. But once you have that awareness, Have a list of activities to shift your focus and break the worry loop that you are in. We're shifting out of the stimulus independent thought, and we are focused on focused attention. Now, think about activities that would fall into these 4 categories to keep in mind for you to shift to when that worry cycle is engaged. Jot these down and list out as many as you can for each category, something that is worthwhile to you. And it's good to have several so that you don't get bored with any one of these, because if you do, you'll end up back in that default mode network again. So the 4 categories. First, attention centering activities. So these are things like mindfulness activities, right? Meditation, focused breath, 4 square breathing, visualization, body scan, connect to nature. Then a second category is expressive and creative strategies. Things like drawing, color, paint, do a project, garden, clean out a closet, listen to a podcast, read from your favorite blog. Then another category is reflection and exploration strategies. Ask questions about your triggering thought. Is this happening right now? Is this a solvable problem? Is there any other way to look at the situation? Journal. Gratitude journal. Do the exercise, notice it, name it, neutralize it. And then finally, lifestyle choices. So things like focus on a relationship. Go hold hands with your spouse. Go play with your child. Call a friend. Make a hot beverage. Make a healthy dinner. Do something physical. Go for a run. Do 20 jumping jacks. Do some squats. Yoga poses. So have different types of activities available for different types of settings. And you want several available for you so you don't get bored at first, because you will have to shift your attention frequently. You are breaking down a reinforcement loop of uh-oh feeling and need to problem solve. Keep this list handy and keep it available to you so that it isn't something that you need to think about.
Okay, I'm going to send, I think it's a really nice resource. So there was a couple more minutes left, but just for the benefit of time, we'll send that after today. But what I wanted to highlight, and it's really important to highlight for clients, is the reason why we're disengaging from worry thoughts. And we're going to talk about different ways. It's really about response prevention. So we don't want clients to feel that what we're doing is thought stopping. Like, oh, I hate my worries and I can't handle having bad thoughts. So I'm going to drink tea to distract from my worry thoughts, or we're going to do the same thing we always do. If we're going to exposure to the core fear and response prevention from the compulsion, so that we're doing these things not to stop thought stopping, to escape from bad thoughts. We're doing these things as sort of blocking the mental compulsion that's giving this sort of false sense of relief without actually solving the problem. And it's more confusing when it's a mental compulsion. It feels more obvious with, okay, I'm going to not wash my hands. I just touched something germy. I'm going to not wash my hands instead. Like I'm in germs. Like clients kind of can get, and as clinicians, to understand that when we don't engage in a physical compulsion, we're trying to ride out the anxiety without the compulsion. It is more confusing when it's a mental compulsion, separating out the thought from the mental compulsion. So are we disengaging from the worry, not to not have the thought because the thought is bad and I can't handle bad thoughts. It's because we can handle feeling uncomfortable moving through this moment without engaging in this mental compulsion. So it's complicated in some ways, but I kind of just always, I hold on tight to sort of this ERP model of like, what am I making contact with? What am I opening up to with the exposures? And what is the response prevention? What am I helping to block in terms of what are the safety behaviors, the avoidance, the thing that someone is doing to not make full contact with what's making them uncomfortable. Okay, so I just wanted to break down a couple of steps to help clients to get to know their worry thoughts and what the worry cycle looks for them. And we have several different logs that you could assign to a client to start kind of tracking their thoughts. Sometimes people will come in with a pretty clear idea of, I just keep worrying about my finances and this thought of being homeless one day. But often it's just like they'll start off with this idea of like, I'm just worrying about everything. And doing a thought tracking log can be very helpful. So this is just one example of a log of just keeping track of the day and time. And I would say if someone can do it for a couple of days, we don't want anyone to feel like so rigid about their homework. Our goal is we just want to catch the worry thoughts as they're unfolding, start seeing what patterns are unfolding. So in the sample log, the day and time, it's always good to notice a situation that I didn't have the day and the time. I find the time really helpful, which we don't have that log because it's always helpful to see, oh, I guess it's normally around 9 a.m. That's when I'm driving to work. And maybe that's a really good time to have an engaging podcast you're listening to. So that time of day can be very helpful. And what's the situation when you notice your brain getting stuck in some worry thoughts, and then jotting down the content of the worry thoughts. So these are just some sample worry thoughts like, Zoe seems like she's in such a bad mood. Is this like the first sign of self-isolation they talk about when someone's in a really bad mental place? Or what if Zoe's watching too much screen time and like it's gonna really cause her harm? So just noticing the worry thoughts. And then I this log here has an extra column for having the individual start to notice, is this actually effective problem solving? Because sometimes there's a time to say like, I wonder if I should stop at the store after work or if I should go right home and go to the gym. There's a time to actually think and decide things. And then there's a time that our brain is just engaging in a future problem that can't really be solved, but it has a similar feeling because worry, it's problem solving. Like, what if this happens? And then what if I do that? So our brain's trying to solve a problem. Sometimes that makes sense to do. So it could be helpful to kind of write down, is this actually helpful information that's happening right now? Or is it actually brain spam or whatever the language that you could identify with the client? And so in those situations, like, is my brain just worrying about a future situation that hasn't happened, that maybe it could happen, but I certainly can't deal with it now? This is more just brain spam versus, is this helpful information? So like for this log here, pulling out of the driveway to the store, could I be forgetting something important? And maybe looking down and realize like, oh yeah, I forgot the receipt, the item that I was going to bring to the store. So sometimes when we have that feeling, it's because there's something immediate that makes sense to be done. And taking a moment to decide, is this effective problem solving right now, or is this sort of like the worry cycle or brain spam or whatever language that you get with a client comfortable identifying. And then sort of traditional cognitive therapy, the thought appraisal piece of the work that we do, sometimes we don't use it as much with OCD and some of the other work that we do, and that cognitive reappraisal can become a compulsion of an individual proving that their scary thought is in fact not true. Like, oh no, did I just touch this germy thing and now I'm going to get really sick? No, I'm not going to get really sick because other people have sat there, and if they sat there, they'd be sick. So sometimes we tread really lightly when it comes to cognitive reappraisal if it feels like someone's using it as a compulsion, but certainly with GAD and offering it to a client to see if they can hold it lightly as one piece of the puzzle of note, can you notice a worry thought? So in this example, Charlotte will always be an outcast. How anxious do I feel? A 9. And then what is the evidence to support this thought? And what is the evidence to show it's not actually true? To support it, oh, she wasn't invited to that one party. What's the evidence that's not true? Well, like, oh, she does have different friends from different activities and she does get invited to different things. How do I feel now? Maybe a 6. So kind of taking a thought that's really hot and noticing, okay, well, what is true about that thought and what is not true. There is a role for appraising catastrophic thoughts. We want to do it gently without, and therefore that promises that I'm okay, because that we can't promise ourselves that, but we could at least be more balanced about how we're looking at a situation. We want to be realistic. It's not about, oh no, everything's bad. No, actually, everything's great and I'm great and I'm going to be successful. It's about, we want to be realistic and balanced in how we view the world around us. So does anyone have any thoughts on like the role of cognitive reappraisal and the cognitive therapy component of working with generalized anxiety disorder or any anxiety disorder? Brian?
Hey, so I generally when I'm working with it, depending on how where their biotemperament is and all that, but I seem to get a lot of over controlled people, which is great because I do RODVT a lot. So I try to give an example of like I'll show them. We have all these abstract pictures in the office, right? So I have them look at one and say like, okay, what do you see in there? Kind of just like an ink blot. And then I explain that like we're just trying to make meaning out of things. So we look at anything we look at, even if we look at another person, our brain just makes up a story of what's going on. And I go, and that's okay. But we just have to be aware of what the variables are that we're filling in because we don't have time to learn everything. And then
Right.
from there,
Yeah.
being like kind of building that flexibility of like,
Yeah.
now am I open to new information
Right.
to change what my perception is of it? And so it's kind of like the cognitive reappraisal, but almost
Yeah.
taking it like kind of like the DBT check the
Yeah.
fact.
It's like a very flexible, like I really like the play. We're just playing with how we're viewing things. Like, oh, this is the only answer. Like, are there many different answers if we change our gaze upon that situation? So really kind of going for the cognitive flexibility piece versus rigid. Really anything rigid hangs out with anxiety and
Oh yeah. And that's where I totally in one of the offices I like to also point out what I see because I'll be like, oh, there's some sharks on this painting. And they're like, what? And I'm like, that's what I see. So and I explain that it's like not that the painter or it's or whoever designed it made that in there, but somewhere in my memory I saw something similar and so my brain connected it because that's what our brain's doing is just saying, okay, I've seen this before. It kind of looks like this. And there we go.
right.
Yeah.
And sometimes we could hear in the tone, sometimes if we're doing a cognitive reappraisal of, well, no, realistically, Zoe does have friends and maybe she's not the most popular kid, but like she has her way of connecting with people. And actually, I really think that she's gonna be okay because sometimes someone will start off doing the cognitive reappraisal and they're kind of speaking in an expansive way and you kind of see that someone's getting pretty narrow and I'll be like, okay, time out. And you can kind of play with that in session with a person of if all of a sudden they're like really grasping tightly to this new story that they're telling themselves. The point is we just have to kind of make room for it all and have faith in our resilience to handle it. So, and being so delicate with the cognitive therapy part of things, that there's definitely a role for it. And we just want to watch how someone uses like all of the tools in the toolbox. Like it's not the answer that's going to prove to them that in fact things are definitely okay. But I love that example, Brian. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna go back to okay. So and then after we've noticed, for some clients are going to come in with more clarity around their core fears sometimes, especially when it's GAD. It's not like OCD where someone's like, I'm really worried about losing control and stabbing my children, doing something terrible. Because it's so diffuse, it might just feel like this is just about my worries and it's not really about a specific fear. So, like in the examples I've been giving through this presentation, someone helping a client understand like what's below the fears around, okay, Zoe's not going to have she's not going to have friends when she gets to middle school. Okay, what will be so bad about that? Okay, well, she's going to get depressed. Well, what's going to be so bad about that? She's going to increase time alone. What's going to be so bad about that? She could end up cutting, using drugs. What's be so bad about that? Ends up killing herself, tries to kill herself. And okay, what? And it feels hard when someone's saying something like that. Okay, what's so bad about that? And I would say to a client, there's a million things that are bad about that. And we're just trying to get to your specific core fears within this nightmarish situation. And within this nightmarish situation, a lot of different people are going to have different core fears within that as well. So what specifically feels so bad about that of her trying to kill herself? Okay, she's hospitalized, we're trying all this different treatment, nothing works, and she just lives a life of misery and barely hanging on and never experiencing joy, wishing she weren't alive. And what's so bad about that? And I'm just there witnessing, sitting back, I can't do anything to help, experiencing pain and suffering. There's nothing I'll be able to do. And we're kind of at the, okay, is there anything below that? So I'm just living a life of like endless torture and pain of watching someone I love suffering forevermore. I'm just indefinitely like in hell, like watching someone I love unable to do anything to help. And then we're kind of getting, we're there of this feeling of just like witnessing pain and suffering and worse than if it were only your own, and helpless to do anything about it, and like indefinite, like that's just it forevermore. There's no other breaks in it. So we're kind of getting, that would definitely be a core fear of like an indefinite emotional pain and suffering. And kind of having clients understand that like within each, it might feel like you had 30 different worry thoughts that week of like, oh no, Zoe didn't get invited to that thing, or does she look unhappy today? But they're all hanging in that similar place. And then it's a little bit of a side pivot, but for some clients, it may make sense to determine, even if they're coming in for GAD, is there something of that core fear that's still undigested? Is there any maybe an undiagnosed PTSD, or maybe like little t trauma, just in terms of maybe for this client, growing up with a very depressed parent that never able to, always trying to make their parent happy and do the right things and whatever they can do to crack the misery of the person around them. And so kind of like hanging with that feeling from the slide before of that core fear, and like there's an ACT exercise where it's like a piece of string that you kind of like, okay, now take that feeling and imagine you're going back in time like a year. Now we're back 2 years, now we're back 5 years, and have that feeling, and let's go back as far as you can remember. Like what's the earliest time you remember that feeling of witnessing, and just, this isn't a perfect exercise, just tell me like a memory back in time that shows up with this same core fear feeling. And you might, there, even if it's not PTSD, it's certainly something like not fully processed, digested, integrated into mental schemas. Brian?
Hey, I don't know if this is
Yeah,
jumping ahead, but it just like,
please jump.
you know, uh, there was an exercise that you just described from ACT. I'm still getting the hang of it myself, called like stand with yourself. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Tell me, because
Uh,
I feel like it probably is the one that I've like interpreted over time to be the one that I just said. Tell
Oh,
us
okay,
about
cool. That's where,
that.
so it's kind of like, yeah, going back to like when you get that core belief,
Okay.
suddenly it's like, when's the first time you had that thought of like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm a burden or I'm not
Yeah.
worthy of this? And then kind of like, transporting yourself there
Right.
to that person. They don't
Right.
know that you're future you. It's not like a Christmas
Yeah.
story or anything.
Yeah.
And being like, what would you say to yourself? What did you really need in that moment? Um,
Uh-huh.
to help you through. And I'm probably fumbling it because I'm still getting the hang of that
Yeah.
technique. But yeah, when you said that, my mind was like, oh, stand with
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so kind of rewinding back to that you, and maybe it's like you're just picturing yourself when you were watching, and like, can you just, even if it's like that, because exposure therapy really is about making room for and holding with compassion. We're not running from that moment. We're actually like shining light. We're holding the pain. Like us now at this age can make room for and hold that scared feeling, which that wasn't possible that we could do that for ourselves then. So there, that act of exposure of making room for that memory and being able to hold it, and with compassion, is really healing and helps to kind of integrate it back in. It doesn't mean it wasn't painful, but it isn't something that we have to run from the way back then it certainly might have made sense to run from. So within GAD work and within these worries, just sometimes like getting under the hood and figuring out within those core fears, how can we open up and make room for those hard moments. That they are hard, and we can handle them, even if we wish certain events didn't happen. We can handle them. Um, and and then just in terms of, and I'm saying step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's of course nothing we do has can ever follow in an order that we could predict, but a core thing that we're going to want to do is create worry scripts to get to the core fears for for a client. So can anyone give an example maybe of a recent session that you worked with a client to create a worry script to practice making contact with one of their core fears or worries? Cameron?
Yeah, I
Go
just
ahead.
did.
Cameron, Christy, please, both of you. Cameron first. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll
good.
go. Yeah, we
Yay.
did a worry script for a client that had a lot of fear around like not being able to find the right person. And so therefore having a lot of anxiety in their relationship. And that was kind of the central theme. And so we
Can you
started.
tell us a little, like a sentence or two, what it sounded like?
Yeah, it was like I will never find the right person. I will never feel truly loved. I'm trying to think of some other kind of statements that were central to it.
Never feeling loved.
Yeah, another one that's come up that we've played with is like, I can't trust myself to pick the right person.
Mhm.
Yeah, those
Yeah,
are the kind of core.
good. Helpful. Christy and then Mia? Yeah, Christy.
Yeah, I had a good one yesterday, I think, where we were playing around with the thought, I am stupid compared to my coworkers. And she talked about like finding like if we replaced it with a positive thought, I am as competent as my coworkers, or a neutral thought, I am qualified to do this. Either way, she was kind of finding that replacing the original thought that comes up with a positive or a neutral thought still seems to really dismiss that original thought and shame her for having it at all to start with. So we talked about, like, instead of replacing the thought, responding to it with a self-compassionate thought, like noticing, oh, I'm having this thought and it's trying to help me. And
Right. What is the thought? I'm not good enough. I'm
I'm stupid compared to my coworkers.
I'm stupid less than, right. So just, I'm stupid less than,
I'm not as competent.
I'm not as competent as others around me, and just like having compassion for that. And so that's a good example. Sometimes like the worry script, as close as we could get to that, like will never be loved, I'm less than others. We don't always need all of the build up to like, and then the quicker we could get to really like the core thoughts and emotions, sometimes it's enough to like, okay, so I will suffer indefinitely, like I'm less than others and I'll have to keep working my whole life but always feeling less than. So we talk about a worry script, but we could be efficient if we have a good idea with the client of like what their hot thoughts are, we could get there pretty quickly too, which is good. Mia?
I have one client who is wanting to get pregnant. So she just got off birth control a couple months ago and she hasn't gotten her period yet. So she's been so worried about it and she's been looking things up and she keeps asking her coworkers about their experience, and her older sister has kids too. So she's been asking her sister and her mom. And so we're working on being mindful and just knowing that even if we do look things up, that's not gonna be specific to her. So the only thing she can do is go talk to her doctor and just trust what the doctor says. And so we're just focusing on like, okay, where are your feet right now? Be where your feet are and just be present in the moment.
And if you did a downward arrow with her, what is her core fear?
Her core fear is that she's going to be infertile and not be able to have kids.
And then what?
And then she'll be so sad because she's a preschool teacher and she loves kids and she just really wants kids.
And so she'll just like live her whole life feeling like empty and unfulfilled and
yeah.
Okay. And so I do this a lot, like okay, so and I think it's sort of like with the client, like, okay, so we're hanging with this. So it, for those who are new to learning, it sounds like, it could sound cruel, like, okay, so we're hanging it. Okay, so they're gonna core fear, so you're living a life of emptiness and infertility and feeling unfulfilled for the rest of your life. Okay. And then I'm just kind of like, okay, and really kind of imagine like we're sitting and we're holding this thought and we're making room and we're not reacting to it. And we're not engaging in compulsions and we're not checking and researching and asking people. And what happens when we hang with this thought and these feelings, like eventually they just shift on their own. So we don't have to start Googling and we don't have to ask somebody. When we do these compulsions, we might get a little relief, but then that thought, our brain has learned like the only way to get rid of that thought is to do a compulsion. When we just like make room for it, okay, I'm holding it and it's hard and I could handle the hard, it starts changing form and then it passes. Then our brain starts thinking about something else on its own without having to engage in a compulsion. So we're just teaching someone that everything, the discomfort will pass and you don't have to fear it. You can handle it. Maddie, or someone just had a comment or did someone else? Sorry.
I just put a comment in the chat. I just love using the downward arrow exercise. It's always so helpful and insightful for clients because it's kind of like a breakthrough moment for sure because they don't really think all the way through to that, that bottom fear. So I just love that you mentioned that a couple of times.
Yeah, because that's like the very thing. All of the song and dance is about not having contact with that. So all of the worrying, so when someone that I spend all this time worrying, it's out of control, your whole life has become stuck in worrying to avoid this very thing that we're doing here together right now. So if we could just hang out with the discomfort, like we're going to free you up for all the time you don't have to spend doing compulsions to avoid what is hard, these hard thoughts and feelings. So you get your life back, you get your time back. So these are great examples.
Dr. Kisson, if you don't mind, Anna, I
No?
thought just going off of that, Anna,
Yeah, please.
comment about the opposite side of that, someone using it for their what they think is their benefit. Anna, I thought that was interesting. If you want to share.
Yeah. So this actually came up with a very young client, like a teenager, where she thinks a lot of her anxiety and her worry cycle helps her succeed in her classes. And like, she thinks that a lot of those scenarios that aren't going to happen, she's like, well, no, I'm avoiding them. And it's literally like, oh, I need to have my backpack ready in 3 days. So I have paper in my binder in case my teacher needs a piece of paper or else they won't like me. And it's that far in the cycle where it's like, cool, let's like a lot of the time, I think this is one of the trainings of like, is this a worst case scenario, a best case scenario, or like a realistic middle? So she, like, even when we try to dig, she doesn't want to let go of a lot of that stuff and the hurt because she thinks it will make her a better achiever if she continues to have it. Like that difference between like healthy anxiety and anxiety that is leading us to feeling overwhelmed and all that stuff. It's been very interesting where a lot of my very control oriented and like workaholic clients, they have a lot of difficulty with letting go of trying to overplan and overdo all that stuff.
Well, and it's sort of like somebody falls into a ditch and all you have is a shovel. So I might as well shovel because at least I'm doing something. And and so there's a certain amount of like, if I'm conscientious enough, if I worry enough, there's sort of this illusion of the protective value and guilt about not worrying. And the key is it's really important to kind of start doing like motivational interviewing. Well then if it's working for you, because what we can't do is convince somebody, if this is what you want to be doing, this is your life. And so if you want to spend 2 hours a day planning your backpack, I mean, it's with adults, I might be like, well, so what do you want to, because you are still here. If a kid was forced, that's a little bit different, but at the same time, so if that's working for you, then okay, what else shall we talk about today? But kind of trying to prove to somebody that their worrying is in fact not working for them can just be like a tug of war that we don't like. If the good news about life is we get to choose, each of us, how to invest our energy. So if that's what you're choosing, the key is we want it to be choices that we make versus things that we feel we have to do.
Totally.
And then kind of let people sit with that for as long as they need until they realize, like in ACT world, creative hopelessness, like this is not working for me anymore. Kind of making contact with the fact that it's the compulsions that are creating the suffering. Trying so hard to not experience pain and suffering is running from pain and suffering is taking up my whole life. But there are ways we could try to get someone closer to that, but also that's kind of the hard thing about GAD too, is that it could feel in line with one's values. Like I really value being a perfectionist and I value being super conscientious. So it's a little harder to give up sometimes than like a compulsion that feels clearly weird, or I shouldn't be doing this. Like I should be planning ahead.
Yeah, totally. It's like a lot of that definitely comes into play where it's like, I don't know why I don't feel good. Everything sucks. My anxiety is controlling my life. And then there's this side of it where it's like, all right, maybe we need to be a little bit more realistic about how these are connected.
Right. And I think having clients understand, like, we're not saying become so mindfully here and now, you're no longer thinking, you're just like in this constant state of flow where you haven't done your homework, you haven't decided where you're going to college, and we we humans, we need to problem solve, and we need to plan for the future, and we need to think, and we need to review what's working, what's not working. But we just need to use the different tools in the toolbox flexibly. And so we're not telling a person like, stop thinking and planning, but just decide when it makes sense and when something's uncertain and you can't actually control it. So that's a great example. I know we're almost out of time for today, so maybe we'll just kind of open this up for the next moment or two, and then we'll do a part 2 of GAD next week, Lisa, or you'll help me figure, or Suzanne help me figure out timing wise. So anyone have any like GAD in general or case specific thoughts about worry, anything they want to throw in the mix? Then I might be greedy and share one more slide. I gave you guys like half a nanosecond, but that's okay. That's okay. Okay. So, just sort of other tools that are helpful in the GAD work is setting up a worry time with a client. And so having them create a time of day that I like to talk about like office hours that maybe, and really being realistic, maybe it's at like 8 to 8:30 after dinner. And you have to, it's like if you say you're gonna have office hours, you have to show up and really be there and then just say, all worries, my door is gonna be open, I'm gonna be there, and maybe have a pen and paper and just, you could write down just to be as like engaged as possible, like be available for those worries and writing down like, oh no, she's gonna end up alone, she's never gonna get married, I'm never getting another job, just kind of being available, and you're there to listen to all worries that choose to show up. And I'd say like a half an hour is, you know, be realistic with the amount of time, because if you say you're going to be there for your worries, you should show up. And then the rest of the day, telling the worry thoughts, like when you're middle of something else, oh no, what prom is coming up? Is she going to get a date? Office hours are at 7 p.m. Like respectfully, you don't want to shut them down, but just, you know, I'm willing to hear you, but office hours are 7 o'clock, come back then. And if the worry doesn't come back then, there's always the next day, but it's just sort of time boxing. It's not just free range, like at any point, at any moment, you're just available to engage with them. But it doesn't mean you're not willing to hear what they have to say. And so kind of really talking to a client, I like to think about it like in office hours of, and then being available and deciding how they're going to keep track of the worries that show up is, it can be, it's about, instead of complete response prevention, like, okay, I'm not washing my hands at all after I touch something red, but okay, I'm going to just watch, just minimizing the compulsion. Like I'm going to count to 3 and then stop washing my hands. So it's a similar way of not saying like stop worrying altogether, but you're just putting some limits around it. So it's not just all the time at the will of your brain. So we will start from that. And okay, well, thank you guys for all your great examples, and it's so helpful to learn with you and from you, so I really appreciate it. So thank you.